There's one statistic out there, and about 10 trillion is the estimate that is lost in the global economy due to cybercrime.
What we're really talking about is not endpoint security in the traditional antivirus, install an agent on your computer perspective, but we're talking about end user security, securing people.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Chipstock Investor. I'm Nick, here today for a special episode on cybersecurity. I am joined by Derek Hanson. Derek, you are from the company Yubico. Looking forward to this conversation to get everyone a lot more familiar with the cybersecurity industry and how it works at a hardware level. Appropriate topic for Chipstock Investor. Thanks for coming on today, Derek.
Thanks for having me on. We're looking forward to this conversation.
I have been as well. So to kick this conversation off, I've got big high level question for you that I think a lot of viewers probably see out there in the media. And it's this statistic that we see kicked around sometimes about how much loss occurs every year due to cybercrime. And there's one statistic out there, and about 10 trillion is the estimate that is lost in the global economy due to cybercrime. What does that even mean? I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around a number like that. That's like 10% of like economic output globally lost to cybercrime. Does that even make sense to cite a figure like that?
I think that's really hard anytime you're quantifying loss, because when you start talking about the impact of something that is catastrophic, it's very hard to actually quantify how far down into the economy does that go. But what I can say is whether it's $10 trillion or it's $1 trillion, that is a significant loss of overall economic output to the entire world. And the interesting part of that is another statistic you can go look at is a data breach report that's been put out by Verizon. And they say out of all of the data breaches that have occurred, 80% of them have been created, or the initial entry point was related to credential theft or account takeover. And so as Yubico, we feel like we're in a very good position to stop the most common source of these breaches and help organizations remove that risk that's faced out there from loss. That loss is very real. We see what happens when you end up with compromised credentials and then it turns into ransomware, or it turns into something else where the whole business is then taken down. You don't have to wait very long between incidents to find something on the front page of the news around this organization is down. And not only is it impacting actual economic output, but it's actually impacting top line revenue numbers for these organizations that are impacted because they're not able to serve their customers. And so revenue is dropping while they are then focused on just trying to get back to business as normal. And so I think this is a significant conversation for any organization to be looking at, which is what can we do to remove that risk of our organization being just crippled?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So the losses can be huge. And you say, I'm sorry, just to be clear, when you say credentials being stolen,
So
that's like passwords, right? Like I'm not
yep.
using a good password, strong enough password.
Or even the fact that you are using a password to begin with, because at the end of the day, the big problem, credentials are what I have to prove to a computer system I'm the authorized user. And so those credentials can be passwords. They can be the one-time codes that are texted to us. They could be certificates. It all depends on the system that you're interacting with and what they're looking for you to prove that you're the right user. But when you
Mhm.
look at what that credential is, there's two major classes of credentials. There's ones that are called phishable, and there's others that are considered phishing resistant. A password, no matter what you do, no matter how strong that password is always going to be phishable just because of the type of credential it is. It's a secret that I have to share with you so that you know that I'm me. And so that problem is there's no way to prevent somebody sitting in the middle and eavesdropping on our conversation, hearing that secret I just told you, and
Mm.
then coming back at a different time and replaying it, or just passing it through and you don't even know that that person's eavesdropping. And so there's the challenge for those credentials is actually phishing. And that's where you get into the cybersecurity nomenclature. So if I get off into my vocab or any of the acronyms that are a daily part of my life, definitely let's pause and let's make sure that that's clear, because what I want people to walk away with is an understanding that there is significant economic impact caused by people stealing how you sign into computers, where the leading cause is people stealing credentials and how you sign into computers. And the leading cause of that is that we have phishable credentials. And until we get rid of those phishable credentials and use something that is stronger, we won't actually reduce that risk, because it is an economical attack to run at a global scale. I
Mm.
can attack you anywhere in the world. I don't need to know anything about you to start running a phishing campaign. And so the economic side of it for the attacker is just too easy, too good, that is going to go as long as we even have passwords. So that's the world that we're in right now, which is also why the uh, success rate of all of these phishing attacks is so prevalent, and people are getting into organizations that they don't belong in and causing all this chaos.
Okay, and that's what's driving a lot of new innovation, a lot of new services coming out around cybersecurity. And maybe I should mention this. So, like, including Yubico, you guys have been around for quite some time, but you just had an IPO, and it seems like the need for new services to solve these problems you're talking about aren't going away. So, maybe before continuing, though, I think I'd like to ask you maybe a bit more of a personal question first. And I think a
Sure.
lot of others probably want to know the same thing. So you're a solutions architect, right? Yubico, you are the head of systems architecture. Do I have that right?
Systems architecture and standards. And I think this is,
Okay.
if I explain that right, that's actually going to help answer where I think you're going.
Yeah. What do you do? What
Okay,
does a
that's why.
systems architect? What does a systems architect do? You wake up in the morning and you're architecting something.
Yeah, wake up in the morning and I'm looking at how do we actually solve real problems. A lot of times you get into engineering conversations where it's, I need to fix this hinge, I need to fix this door, I need to build this thing. And at the architect level, you're looking at, why am I doing this? Why am I putting this hinge on this door for this cabinet for this house? It's to make sure I have a place to keep my things. And
Mhm.
so I think ultimately the architect level is saying, I need to use the tools that I have available to build something that solves the problem. And our focus primarily has been on what are the tools we have available to improve how users sign into applications, their computers, et cetera. The standard side of things, which is, I think, the fun part of where we're talking about, where Yubico has been investing for the last 10 years or so, has been that we are looking at saying, the tools we have aren't good enough. But we work in a large ecosystem of companies. So if we go build a new tool and nobody else wants to use that tool, it doesn't actually help us work out. So the standards is all about saying we need a new tool in that toolbox. We need that tool to be accessible to everybody so that everyone can go build and repeat these patterns of actually how they protect themselves. So a lot of the standards work is around, how do we build phishing resistant authentication and bring it in mass to the world. And so that is the focus right now, and that is my job day in and day out, is the politics and the work to decide how does that tool going to work? Does it have a black handle? Is it made out of, has it got a rubber on it, or is it just a straight metal hammer? And maybe it shouldn't be a hammer this time. Maybe it needs to be something else because we have enough hammers. Pick your analogy, but the end of
Mhm.
the day, it's all about where are we going, and where we're going is directly at this phishing problem.
Okay. So that's an interesting analogy you make because, the overall framework for this conversation is actually hardware, semiconductors, chips, computing systems, whatever you want to refer to it as. And so this feeds in probably to what you do on a daily basis because Yubico is a hardware based cybersecurity company. I think this is interesting because I think most people's experience with cybersecurity is software, especially just like your good old fashioned antivirus that you download on your PC and you call it good. But it starts with hardware, right? Like, how do you architect and build standards around a piece of hardware purpose built for cybersecurity?
And that is ultimately the challenge. So, when we look at, here's my key ring. I've got my house. my car, and my YubiKey all together. With those three things, I can unlock anything in my digital or physical world. I'd love someday to be just the one key, one electronic key that unlocks my house, my cars, and my identity. We're not there yet. But the piece of hardware is important because that piece of hardware, we're used to that in the physical world. We're used to carrying something that grants us access. The reality is we've gotten very comfortable with the concepts that our world is driven by software when we're online.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're using good quality devices that have hardware inside of them that enable secrets to be kept securely. But a lot of times we're using the most economical device that we can purchase at the time, and it may not have the features and the security that we need. And so the reality is we need portable security that works wherever I am, whether I'm on a corporate issued laptop, I'm on my phone, I'm on the tablet, that lets me sign in securely. And really, the only way to do that portably and securely is to carry a piece of hardware. There is a large, robust cybersecurity hardware industry focused on what you deploy in data centers. We are hardware for people that pair, it's the other hand of that data center equation. You can put all the security you want in the data center, but if you don't give the people the right hardware that they can use, you're actually not enabling them to sign in securely and actually compute securely. Because at the end of the day, you're buying hardware. It's your laptop, it's your phone, but we're not focused as much on buying the hardware to protect and unlock our identity online. And we probably should be based on what we're seeing as the effects.
Right, especially in light of the statistic you mentioned from Verizon that most attacks start with, it would be like us, the user, right? Like we do something to cause the big corporate cybersecurity news item that you don't want
Yep.
leaking out there. So we're talking about hardware, computing devices here for security. How does that differ from just a general purpose compute piece of hardware? How do you design cybersecurity hardware differently from a general purpose computer?
Oh, that's a great question for us because I think that is exactly what we are advocating for is that there is specialty needs for purpose-built hardware. The reality when you talk about general purpose computing, it needs to do everything for everyone. And how often do you get software update patches for your browser, for your operating system, for the applications that you're running? How often do you see that oh, I've got one version of something on my phone, I got a different version on my laptop, and they're not working together. It's because it is very difficult in a general purpose device to always secure all the things. With a purpose built security device, you have a very limited footprint. And that very limited footprint allows you to focus on ensuring that the things that are used behave well. Does that mean that the security devices will never have problems? No. But what it means is it has a much smaller surface area to attack, and it's a lot easier to guard the walls, so to speak, of that structure that you're talking about. When you're talking about a modern operating system, it is so complex. It has been built over decades. There's software in there that has not been touched in forever. And that's the reality of giant systems is that the complexity makes it hard to secure. The more simple it is to use, the less likely it is to actually have a security issue. I think in general, we look at our phones, specifically our phones,
Mhm.
as the do it all for everything because we see home automation, we do all these things. I live and breathe on my phone. But the reality is there's certain things that your phone is just never going to be able to do as well. That's why we still carry credit cards, even if we can put a credit card on our phone. There's just places it's not going to work. There's times that a digital presence requires something physical to actually protect those major secrets.
So I'm thinking about this and I'm thinking, so you designed these YubiKeys, which I'll ask you about maybe here in a moment more specifically. And I'm thinking about like the old devices called firewalls. If you're designing a piece of hardware for people, for personal use, is this basically like a firewall that you carry around with you? Or is it something else entirely?
You ever seen one of those custodian keychains where they have the big ring of all the keys? I would think about carrying a custodian keychain inside a safe. It's a safe where everything's locked up, but you have all the keys, everything's accessible once you get inside of it to help you unlock the doors that you need to get into. And so it's not so much as a firewall, like I'm protecting everything, but it's about a safe. I put my secrets, the keys to my most precious items in there, and then I can unlock them when I want to go use those keys to get access to those systems.
Interesting. Okay. So not a firewall. That's something different, a
Yeah.
safe that you can carry around with you.
And the reason I just used a slightly different analogy is purely because the firewall is always on. You always have it plugged in. The YubiKey you use at the time, you open it up and use it at the time you need to use it. And it helps you use software securely or lets you use other features of software that are designed for security. And then you can put it back in your pocket. The idea is not that you have to use it for everything, everywhere, all the time, but that you are able to unlock the secure and the most sensitive things, and then you just have it available when you need to. So
Okay.
that's the only difference between a firewall, which is kind of an always on, always plugged in thing. This is much more on demand. I need to use it. And so, that's literally why it has a keyring hole in it is so that, you know where to find it, but because it doesn't always need to be plugged in.
Okay. I promise not to get us too far off into the weeds, but I have to ask because now I'm thinking about this. The way I've always tried to explain this to investors the last few years, anyways, is old security based on these firewalls is kind of like a castle with a moat. Some of this newer security that's being developed is more like maybe you still have like the castle and moat somewhere, your data center, your office building, but like everybody's running around in the wild with a computing device. And so now you need like a counterintelligence agency of sorts. So like a YubiKey is a way for you out there in the wild to like protect your secrets from someone, from a spy.
So I hear the analogy. I'm just thinking through here.
Okay.
I would actually tweak it slightly because I think
Okay.
you're on the right track, which is, when you have data that you care about or you have an application that you're concerned with, you do put that castle and that moat around it. But what's happening in computing is we're going into a architecture standard that's called zero trust.
Mhm.
And if you look at like some of the old medieval cities and you walk through there, once you got through that outside wall, there wasn't a lot of what was called defense in depth. There wasn't other checkpoints and other gates. And so it's happening instead of having one monolithic castle and moat where you have one gate that everyone's coming through. What you're starting to see is organizations break it up into hundreds of castles and moats around their applications, and that key allows the person to prove who they are securely. So it's kind of, think of it a little bit like a passport and a customs agent.
Okay.
That customs agent has never seen me before, but I have something that I carry that proves who I am, who I belong to, and they're able to verify that credential at the time I'm trying to cross the border. And when you're securing something the size of a country, you have lots of border entries, you have lots of agents checking all of these credentials. And so the analogy is kind of flipping because it was 100% like what you talked about. It used to be one castle wall, one door in that everyone fortified. And it's radically started to change in the last 10 years, which was
Mhm.
massively accelerated by COVID and the work from home. Because now it's not, I can trust you because you're in my office. It's, I need to verify you wherever you are doing work on behalf of our company. And that distributed trust requires a strong credential for each user.
Yeah.
And that's the niche that we believe we're helping fill for enterprises at large. And we're seeing large success with this for many organizations.
Okay. That makes sense. Thank you for humoring me with the analogy and for tweaking it. That makes sense. Okay. So, you're talking about this passport you have to carry around. You're basically talking about a type of endpoint security. Is that where Yubico fits into like the whole cybersecurity industry and the ecosystem that's being built around the whole classic cybersecurity industry? I know that passkeys fit into this somehow with endpoint. How do you break that down? what is endpoint security? Where do you fit into that part of the market?
I think this is looking at the industry and how we identify ourselves a little bit here. We view that as a slightly different niche. And I can understand the looking at security from a macro market perspective of being, kind of data center security and then people and devices in the kind of the endpoint bucket. What we're really talking about is not endpoint security in the traditional antivirus, install an agent on your computer perspective, but we're talking about end user security, securing people. And so, as a person, you might actually have multiple personas within your professional life, as well as
Mhm.
multiple personas outside. As you as an individual, you as a citizen, you as a volunteer in an organization. There's a variety of things. So, when we're talking about securing people, it's a slightly different picture when you're talking about what happens when I'm now securing all the end users. And when you look at this from what does it take to protect an organization, many organizations, especially ones that have what are considered first line or frontline workers, they actually end up with a lot more people than they have end user devices. And so they have more people to secure than they have endpoints. Some of the organizations I've been at were like that. It was large retail. I've been around large manufacturing, and it's actually more important to enable the people to sign in to securely do their job and remove the friction from their world. So it is definitely lumped in at a market perspective from endpoints, because it's outside the data center and it's about making sure people have tools, but it's much more about the identity, who that person is, how we onboard. In many ways, it's more related to secure employee onboarding and offboarding from an HR perspective, sometimes more so than cybersecurity, but we just deal with cybersecurity as a phishing conversation. When I was at a large retailer, onboarding 30,000 employees every October meant you had to do that securely and quickly to make sure business ran. And that's the
Mhm.
priority. How can we do this quickly and fastly so that they can do their job and I'm not worried about some hole opening up in my business?
So maybe just for in this particular example with retail, you might have like a point of sale, maybe like checkout desk, but there's
Hmm.
5 employees that are going to use that checkout desk throughout the day. And so to make it easier for them to log in and out, that's where like a YubiKey would come in.
Yeah,
Is that what you mean? Okay.
that's what I mean. Yeah, checkout desk or manufacturing station, a facility that's running with lots of different people where they're coming in to do a job, or even look at hospitals.
Mhm.
As a doctor, you're moving from room to room to room. You need to sign in to get patient records. You need to do so securely, and but you have more doctors than you have rooms. So there's a lot of scenarios where first line work it's not just retail, it's not just manufacturing. There are lots of high sensitivity, high risk use cases in those first line workers. It's just a model of how do I do business. And so I think that's the key piece is those employees have to be able to do their job quickly, fastly, and securely, or you're running a risk to actually top line revenue.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Yeah. That's an interesting way of thinking about that, the endpoint security, because it sounds different. Okay. So you're securing people.
People.
Before the last question, I just want to ask you again about the pass keys themselves. So you've got a YubiKey. What is this thing? What's on there? What's the hardware technology on there that's enabling these pass keys? Can I ask that?
Absolutely. And I think
Okay.
that's exactly why I use the custodian's key ring analogy is because the YubiKey actually does a lot of different things. One of the things it does is support passkeys, which is part of the broader FIDO2 standard, which is out of the really deep and nerdy technical things I was talking about earlier. But when you look at the key, it holds what's called a passkey on it, and it can hold lots of passkeys on it. So if I have a passkey for my employer to sign in to get to my email or to sign into kind of their portal to access all my applications, I could have a couple of passkeys on it for my corporate world. Maybe I have a business partner I'm signing into. Maybe I'm in the finance role and I've got banks I need to access. Those passkeys can live on there. We also support a lot of the traditional other enterprise authentication methods on the key so that as we're migrating away from the problems of today, we can still secure users the best we can with what's there. We still
Mhm.
have those castles and moats. Those aren't going away quickly, but we need to be able to, as the new areas get built up and secured, we need to make sure users can get into the old legacy world as well as the new modern world. And that's what we've done on this device is give you keys that operate in between these two worlds, that let you protect the user that you're issuing that key to the best way you possibly can, depending on what are the security models in these different castles you have set up.
Interesting. So you're cramming like a bunch of tech on there. If I could rattle off a few things, so like maybe
Sure.
on there you have like RFID. Is there an NFC chip on there?
Yep. Some of our keys support NFC. So obviously, all of them have USB-C or USB. Some of them have Lightning, NFC, so that you can tap it on the phone. And then we have a lot of applications on there. So the applications themselves do one-time passwords or do what's called FIDO or passwordless or passkeys and support things like certificates as well. So
Okay.
we have the interfaces so that the applications that have been using these types of devices know what to do when that YubiKey is plugged in. And probably our
Okay.
biggest thing that was incredible to see, going back to that standardization, is when you plug a YubiKey in, you don't need to install extra software. Your browser and your operating system today know how to use it when you go to sign in to sites that support FIDO and passkeys. There's nothing extra you have to do as a user. You just need a key, and then the application itself can walk you through because we've standardized FIDO2 into all the major browsers and devices in the world.
Hmm. Very cool. So this sounds like it's a microcontroller of sorts, purpose designed for cybersecurity for this specific security purpose.
Yeah, we have what's called a secure element in there, which is the most secure class of chips that are on the that have been designed so that it's a vault that is resistant to severe physical tampering. And
Okay.
so that you can rely on the keys being stored in there. And then, yeah, we have USB controllers and NFC controllers so that you can actually use those keys when you need to use it with your devices.
Okay. All right. Cool. Nerdy
Yeah,
stuff. I like it.
that's great.
Last question then. What do companies need to have to be considered safe today? What are all the tools and procedures in that toolbox that you were talking about to make a robust and secure work environment?
If I'm going into an organization, I'm looking at a couple of things. Initially, it's going to be how are we securing access to our applications from the world, that network and firewall layer. I'm going to look at how are we encrypting the communications to the outside world? Do we have the right infrastructure in place to use modern cryptography to make sure that those connections to our apps are secure? Are we patching and updating all of our systems and software so that when there is a known security issue, we're quickly actually resolving that so that we're not exposed? And then the next major piece of that is I'm looking at my organization for phishing. The goal right now is to not just deploy multi-factor authentication, it's to deploy phishing resistant authentication for everything the user does. Because if we want to tie it back to where we started, if we can make all of our users phishing resistant, we make our enterprise phishing resistant. And if our enterprise is phishing resistant, 80% of the breaches that are caused by credential theft and compromise are no longer something that is going to be a risk that we have to deal with as a business. We
Mm.
can focus on those other class of problems, and we can also just focus on going out and making money. Phishing resistant authentication is going to put you, to borrow that analogy, you don't have to be the fastest one out there. You just got to run faster than your friend when the bear is chasing you. It's just going to mean you're faster than all the rest of your friends that are out there still using phishable authentication. So the goal, and this is what I'll be talking about a lot over the next couple of years, is getting to phishing resistant enterprises, which means we have worked hard to remove phishable authentication, specifically passwords, from the user's day to day life. We get to that point, and an organization is much more secure than where they were today.
I am all for getting rid of passwords. I look forward to that day. So
You and I
appreciate you
both.
working that. All right. Thank you. Thank you for joining us again, everyone. Derek Hanson from Yubico. Really appreciate your time and coming on today and helping increase our understanding of cybersecurity and especially the hardware side of it. Look forward to talking to you again someday.
All right. Thank you very much, Nick.